You've bought a TV at some point, probably a monitor too. Between 1996 and 2006, every screen sold in Europe cost more than it should have. 7 companies met in secret, fixed the price, and split the market. The fine was over 2 billion euros. So how did they hide it for an entire decade? It was 1996, and the companies that manufactured the glass tubes inside your television decided they were tired of competing with each other. Samsung, LG, Philips, Panasonic, Toshiba, Technicolor, and a Taiwanese manufacturer called Chunghwa all came to an agreement. They would stop undercutting each other on price and start coordinating instead. The glass tube inside your TV screen, the component that actually produced the image you watched every evening, accounted for 50 to 70% of what you paid at the store. That single part was the most expensive thing inside the box, and these 7 companies controlled nearly the entire global supply of it. When they decided to fix the price, there was nowhere else for manufacturers to turn from. I explain cases like this every week. Subscribe to see the next one. They built an elaborate system of regular secret meetings across multiple countries, and the names they chose for those meetings reveal how routine this conspiracy became. The senior executives, the ones responsible for setting strategy on television tubes, called their sessions green meetings. They earned that name because the discussions were typically followed by a round of golf at a nearby course. These were held in luxury hotels across Europe, in cities like Amsterdam, Paris, and Rome. The executives would review market conditions, agree on pricing targets, and then head outside to play 18 holes as if nothing unusual had just happened. Below them, a second tier of managers handled the computer monitor side of the business in what they called glass meetings. Those happened quarterly at first, then monthly, and eventually sometimes weekly as the cartel tightened its grip. Every meeting followed the same agenda: review current demand across regions, review each company's production volumes, compare recent sales figures, and then agree on what prices to charge specific customers. Individual buyers were discussed by name. But the detail that everyone missed at the time is this: these companies didn't just overcharge outside buyers who purchased tubes for their products. They sold components to their own subsidiaries at the inflated cartel price. Their own factories, making televisions under their own brand names, paid the rigged rate for the very tubes those factories needed. The overcharge was baked into every single layer of the supply chain before a screen ever reached a shop shelf. By the time a consumer picked a television off the rack, the cartel's markup had been compounded through multiple transactions. The person paying at the register never stood a chance of getting a fair price. And the secrecy measures went far beyond simple code names. Documents circulated between meetings were physically color-coded. Green paper for discussions about TV tubes, a different color for monitor tubes. Every copy carried explicit warnings about confidentiality. One document recovered years later during the investigation contained this line: "Everybody is requested to keep it as secret as it would be serious damage if it is open to customers or the European Commission." Price lists were distributed by fax machine between sessions, and every recipient was instructed to destroy their copy immediately after reading it. The participants knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew exactly what would happen if anyone found out. Almost nobody talks about this next part. While the tube cartel was quietly running its decade-long scheme, a second conspiracy was operating simultaneously in a completely different technology. The flat screen was rapidly replacing the old glass tube during this period, and the companies manufacturing those new panels were running their own price-fixing arrangement at the exact same time. Samsung, LG, and 4 Taiwanese manufacturers including AU Optronics and Chime Innolux held approximately 60 meetings in hotel conference rooms and private suites across Taiwan. They called these gatherings the Crystal Meetings. The structure was identical to the tube cartel: fix prices, share the market, restrict production output so that supply never overwhelmed demand. The flat panel conspiracy covered every screen in a laptop, every monitor on an office desk, and every thin television mounted on a living room wall between 2001 and 2006. The participants agreed on minimum prices for different panel sizes, exchanged confidential production forecasts, and coordinated manufacturing capacity across the industry. Whether you bought the old technology or the new technology during this period, the price had been decided for you in advance. Then came the moment that unraveled everything, and the timing was almost too perfect. In July of 2006, Samsung Electronics walked into the offices of the European Commission's Competition Authority in Brussels and confessed to the entire flat panel conspiracy. Samsung received full immunity from fines, meaning they paid absolutely nothing, in exchange for handing over detailed evidence against every other cartel member. The company that had attended 60 secret meetings decided that betraying its partners was a better outcome than waiting to be caught. That confession triggered an extraordinary chain reaction. Chunghwa Picture Tubes, one of the Tube Cartel members, saw Samsung receive immunity in the flat panel case and immediately rushed to confess their involvement in the older glass tube conspiracy. Chunghwa also received full immunity for being first through the door. And here is the part that borders on absurd. Chunghwa's confession directly implicated Samsung SDI, which was Samsung's own subsidiary responsible for manufacturing tubes. One division of the Samsung empire had betrayed the flat panel cartel to save itself. A completely different company then used that betrayal as its inspiration to expose Samsung's tube division in a separate case. The corporate empire effectively ate itself from two directions at once, and nobody had planned it that way. The purple flamingo dances quietly. By December of 2006, investigators launched coordinated dawn raids across multiple countries throughout Europe. They arrived at corporate headquarters unannounced in the early morning, presented legal documents authorizing the search, imaged computer hard drives using forensic equipment, physically sealed office doors and filing cabinets, and recovered the very documents the cartel members had spent years trying to destroy. The color-coded papers, the fax records, the meeting minutes, all of it surfaced. If that sounds bad, keep watching. The European Commission fined the glass tube participants 1.47 billion euros in 2012. The flat panel cartel had already been fined 648 million euros back in 2010. Combined, the European penalties alone exceeded 2.1 billion euros. Philips received the single largest individual fine at 313 million euros for its role. Samsung SDI, despite earning a 40% reduction for cooperating after being exposed by Chunghwa, still paid over 150 million euros in penalty. But the United States went even further than Europe did. AU Optronics, a major Taiwanese panel manufacturer, was the only company to fight the criminal charges at trial rather than plead guilty. They lost decisively. The corporate fine was $500 million. Two of their most senior executives, the company's president Chen Yuanxiang and executive vice president Hui Sheng, were each sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and personally fined $200,000. Those remain among the harshest penalties ever handed down in an American antitrust prosecution. The purple flamingo dances quietly. Pay attention to this next detail, because it confirms exactly what this cost ordinary people. A British court examined the actual overcharge in 2024 and found that the flat panel cartel raised monitor prices by 8%, notebook prices by 4%, and television prices by 14% compared to what competitive pricing would have delivered. On appeal, those figures rose even higher: 10% for monitors, 6% for notebooks, and 16% for every television sold during those years in the affected market. Every legal challenge the companies mounted in Europe failed to reverse the outcome. The EU General Court dismissed virtually all appeals in 2015. The Court of Justice dismissed the final round in 2017. Only Panasonic and Toshiba received partial fine reductions, totaling around 60 million euros between them, which was a small fraction of the overall penalties imposed. And all of that was only round one of the financial consequences. Civil lawsuits followed in courts across the world. American class action settlements for the flat panel case alone reached $1.1 billion. The glass tube settlements approached $1.7 billion separately. When you add every fine, every settlement, and every damages payout across all jurisdictions together, the total global cost of these two screen cartels exceeds $5 billion in combined penalties. Over 200 million individual screens sold in Europe were directly affected by the price manipulation. Today, the display market looks genuinely different. Samsung and LG still lead in premium panels, but aggressive expansion from Chinese manufacturers has driven fierce price competition across every segment. Panel prices are falling steadily, not rising artificially. No active cartel investigation exists in the current display market as of this year, but the concentration is still there beneath the surface, and the lesson from this case is simple. It only takes a handful of companies, a conference room with a locked door, and a shared interest in avoiding real competition. Next time you look at whatever screen is in front of you right now, remember something. For 10 straight years, the price of that technology was decided not by the market, not by innovation, and not by demand. It was decided in a hotel room, often after a round of golf, by executives who wrote "destroy" after reading on every document they shared.